Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome into tonight's class, How to Stand Out as a Podcaster. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second so I can see you guys coming in. All right, cool beans. You're trickling in. I'm Nikayla Matthews Okome. I can't wait to chat with you guys. And, tonight is just going to be, although I'm presenting, I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. So whenever you have a question, just go ahead and drop them in the Q&A. And let me see. Oh, yes, the chat is enabled, you guys. I did it. So tonight you can also, as I'm talking, respond in the chat. So it can be like more interactive, like a two-way thing. So I'm getting ready to share my screen with you guys as you guys trickle in. You don't have to raise your hand because I can't call on you. Just drop any questions you have in the Q&A. And my teammate Joanna will be making sure that we log all those questions tonight so I can get to all of them. All right. Cool beans, cool beans. So give me a 1 in the chat if you can see my screen. Let me know if you can see my screen, you guys. All right, cool. I love Zoom. I used to do this on something else, not the same. All right, so we're in business. Like I said, my name is Nikayla Matthews Okome. I'm the host of the Side Hustle Pro podcast. If you haven't heard of it, it's a show. It's now on the HubSpot Network, top business podcast, where I interview Black women side hustlers who scaled from side hustle to full-time entrepreneurs. And you can find me at Side Hustle Pro on all social media platforms. So tonight, my goal is really a couple things. As I shared on the registration page, I want to walk you through what you need to know before you launch your show. Plus, I want to share a quick and easy way to grow your show fast, like to come out the gate with listeners ready to go. And then number 3, I want to talk about how you actually make money from podcasting and how to set yourself up to get there. Plus, I'll also be sharing how, if you want to keep getting coaching from me, keep getting my advice and being able to pick my brain, how you can get coaching inside of my Podcast Moguls program. All right. So stay until the end because we will have Q&A. And of course, I also have a bonus for you. If you stay until the end, you will get a free Libsyn promo code. Libsyn is what I use for my podcast host. And if you use my code, you'll be able to start your podcast and host it for the first month and a half free. So that's my gift to you tonight for being here. Now, let me know who's here. Let me know who's in the building. Again, over in the chat, let me know which one are you. Number 1, 2, or 3. Have you been number 1? Thinking about starting a podcast for a while, but kind of overwhelmed or unsure about where to start? Number 2, do you and your friends have this podcast idea and you want to start, but you just want to make sure you kind of understand podcasting and do it right? Or, or number 3, have you already started your podcast or you're getting ready to press, submit and start it, and you just kind of want to make sure you're being more strategic? All right. I see I see a mix of ones and threes. Okay. You're all in the right place. Whether you have started or not, these tips tonight are going to help you. You could literally take these tips and just start implementing them tonight and you will see an impact. So I'm really happy that you're all here tonight. And I love teaching this class because everyone always hits me up and tells me that they started and it started working. So this is, before I get into that though, I do want to do a little rewind because I know not everyone in the room knows my own journey. And I think it's very important for you guys to know that the Side Hustle Pro you see today, with 9 million downloads, and if you follow me on social media, you know that yesterday, out of the blue, Gabrielle Union shared like a highlight of my show and a spotlight and all this stuff. Like, all of this comes out of the blue when you just lay low and build and do the work. I started from scratch, just like a lot of you are going to be starting from scratch. So I want you to know my own pathway. So first of all, my show is, we're pulling up on the 7-year anniversary. I started it in 2016, and it's now a hit podcast, top 100 podcast on the HubSpot network called Side Hustle Pro. Since then, I've amassed over 9 million downloads, multiple 6 figures in sponsorship. And it was my side hustle, right? While I was working full time. So I was working full time at NPR. And while there, I was leading serendipitously and ironically, I was leading the digital marketing for their top podcasts, like How I Built This, Code Switch, many of your faves. And overall, I have over 15 years of experience as a marketer. So in 2017, after launching my podcast a year before, actually a year and a half before, I was able to quit my job to podcast full-time. Podcasting is now my full-time career. I make money from this, consistent money every single month. I not only survive, but thrive off of podcasting. And so this is the post that I put up when I quit. I actually recorded an episode about it. So you can scroll back to the December 27th episode of Side Hustle Pro and hear about what went into that decision, how I'm moving forward, all of that, what was in my head at the time. And in 2022, just last year, Side Hustle Pro was actually inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame by my peers at Podcast Movement and Libsyn. That was just a full circle movement for me, 5 years into podcasting, 6 years into podcasting to have that happen. None of these things are things you ever expect or know are possible, but I'm here tonight to tell you what's possible so you are truly strategic about going about this path. If you're here tonight, I hope that you have your business hat on and you're truly thinking about not just doing this as a hobby, but ways that you can leverage it to do so many other things. There's a reason why people are getting into podcasting. No, it's not too crowded. You know, Michelle Obama's on her second podcast now. This space is not too crowded. You are here at the right time. So on a personal note, I am Jamaican, born in Jamaica, grew up in the Boogie Down Bronx. Let me know if any yardies in the building. This is us in front of our mango tree. And another thing I love about podcasting, well, the main thing I love about podcasting is the fact that podcasting gave me freedom and flexibility, right? Because in this picture, I'm actually on my honeymoon in Zanzibar. And when I had a job, I had very few vacation days. Actually, too few vacation days to both get married and take a honeymoon in the same year. So I ended up postponing the honeymoon to the following year because I just didn't have the vacation days and I still worked full time. I had to ask someone for permission to go where I wanted to go. But what podcasting allowed me to do is not only quit my job, but then also go on the honeymoon of my dreams, but more than anything, have the freedom and flexibility to work on the schedule that I need to work on. So I can work from anywhere. My husband Moyo and I were both certified side hustlers. We're juggling parenting, careers, our many entrepreneurial passions. So flexibility is huge for us. Flexibility is more important than money for us because we love being able to be there for our son. Right now, I'm pregnant with our second, and it is nice to know that, you know, we're able to go to a doctor's appointment tomorrow. We don't have to like reschedule all this stuff because of the flexibility that podcasting has given me. So again, when I had a job, I had little leave, and that includes family leave. But podcasting allowed me to stay home with my son for what ended up being 24 months because of the pandemic. I couldn't get him into any daycare. So I wasn't expecting that much time at home, but it was still, again, nice to not have the pressure of trying to work from home and, you know, dial into Zooms and look professional. I could be in my pajamas, giving him naps while working around that schedule, you know, while earning an income. So I want that for anybody who wants it. I want whatever your goal is, and I'd love to see some of those in the chat. Whatever your goal is in becoming a podcaster, please let me know. Deborah, shout out to Deborah from Kingston. My son's name is actually Kingston. So let me know in the chat some of your goals and your whys. All right. Now, on the road to podcasting, I've done a lot of things right. And I've also done a whole lot of things wrong. Like, this was me back in 2015, you guys. I was graduating from my MBA program, my business school program, and I know I look happy, but inside I'm actually freaking out because at this point I was rejected from this Google internship that I thought was going to lead to a full-time job. It didn't. So I was graduating with no job. And I was moving back to DC to live with my boyfriend with no money. I'm talking about I had no savings. I had just balled out in business school. I had $0 to my name. Don't be like me. Okay. So I got back and I said, all right, what can I do? I want to attract employers. So I said, all right, I'm going to start blogging again. And at that point, I knew I wanted to build my personal brand. You guys, build your personal brand. Don't let anybody tell you that it's corny, it's not important, or it's inauthentic. This is when I first turned my attention to this. Nobody taught me that in all those years of business school. So I wasn't sure what it entailed, but I wanted to find out. So I did what many of you are doing tonight, which is I started following online branding coaches. I started buying their courses. I started just learning about this world that I didn't understand. And then I relaunched my blog, and it was very tacky. As you can see, this is an example graphic from that blog. So I had content on the blog, but I still didn't really have a purpose. But the important thing was that I got started. Same thing with your podcast. You don't have to do everything perfectly. You don't have to have it all figured out. Even after you come to tonight's class, keep going, launch as is, and we will course correct, especially if you join Podcast Moguls and I coach you, we will course correct. You have to get started though, because the most important thing about journeys like ours, non-traditional path, is you have to be willing to take the first step, even when you don't know where it will lead, okay? So for me, that meant continuing to blog. And then after a while, I started realizing this common thread, which was I loved sharing the stories of Black women entrepreneurs and side hustlers. And that's when the idea for my podcast, Side Hustle Pro, was born. So I launched a podcast. This is the old logo. A year before launching, by the way, I didn't even know what a podcast was. I had just listened to my first podcast in 2015. Then a year later, I'm launching in 2016. And in the first 7 days after launching Side Hustle Pro, I landed in the top charts. This is Side Hustle Pro on the left, top 10 in marketing, and on the right in business, number 37 in business. This is the first week out. So I'm like, all right, I'm juiced up. I'm motivated now. I'm like, okay, so I get these tacky t-shirts printed up. I say tacky because if you look closely, you can see like the ink is just kind of faded, but I put up a shop. That was my first, pay attention, that was my first monetization test. So I printed up some t-shirts and I went hard on promoting my podcast that summer. Everywhere you saw me, I was wearing this Side Hustle Pro t-shirt. And that's because of the reception when I launched the show. And by the way, this can happen for you too, following the steps that I teach tonight. So because of the reception of Side Hustle Pro, I realized that I was onto something. And if I took this seriously, I could indeed quit my job. So I started studying, okay, how do you make money from podcasting? I'm working at a place where people have millions of downloads a week. That wasn't me. So I needed to figure out, what do I do as a smaller independent podcast? It's different. It's different for us and for you when you're starting out. For me, again, I did what many of you are doing tonight. I invested in myself. And this is why the side hustle thing is so key. You have to be able to be your first investor, which means you have to have a job and you have to start investing and being your first investor in your podcast and in your business, but you have to do so strategically. So the most expensive and like the first major line item that I had for the business was investing $1,197 in a 2-day event sponsorship intensive. Notice I said event. Guys, this wasn't even podcast specific, but I was just eager to learn anything at all about sponsorship. I was like, teach me about this world. I want some money for my show. So I went, and 6 months after launching my podcast, I started cold pitching, meaning I didn't know anyone at these companies. I was sending emails to email addresses I found on the internet. And I pitched and I earned my first $4,000 podcast sponsorship contract. So that just put the battery in my back. I said, if I can do this with a cold pitch, imagine if I just 5X my energy and I 5X my effort. Like, quit the job. This is more than enough. So I kept going. At this point, Side Hustle Pro is being featured on Apple. 3 years into it, 2019, it's being featured on Today. It's being featured in the Oprah show and on Forbes. And then 3 years later, I even did a live show, which, if you're paying attention, with Maya Elias, who is one of the first people that I showed on that slide when I was learning about personal branding and investing in courses to learn about blogging. That was one of my first guests on the show and my guest for my live show. So talk about full circle moment. But that took me 3 years, you guys. I want you to know that this is not overnight success. I'm not, selling you a dream. Like this is how long my path took. So now let's get into the nitty gritty of how did I go from graduating with no job and no money to landing in the Podcast Hall of Fame. And I'm now on a podcast network as well. So let's get into my top 3 tips. All right. Let me just hit up the chat real. Someone said, nice t-shirt. All right. Okay, cool. I see some of your goals, supplementing your income, merging into podcasting. Yes. Supplementing your income with your side hustle is key. It's such a good thing to do for wealth building and for overall security. So let's get ready to learn these 3 tips so you can do the same. So first I'll read the tips and then I'll break them down individually with lessons. Tip number 1, to stand out as a podcaster, you have to establish your angle. All right. So I'm going to break down the quickest way that you stand out from the masses and you gain attention from day one, how you establish this angle. Tip number 2 is to stand out as a podcaster. You can follow this quick and easy method to grow your show fast. It's the method I use. It's the method many of the podcast moguls have used because I teach it inside of Podcast Moguls. So I'm going to teach you how to use Instagram to find your listeners before you even launch, so you can have listeners on day 1, gain your first 1,000 downloads, and keep growing from there. And then tip number 3, to make money podcasting, identify your revenue streams and pick a path. So I'll teach you how to set yourself up to get there, because making money from podcasting doesn't just come overnight. You have to lay the groundwork. You have to lay that foundation. So I'll teach you exactly what that means and how to do it. All right, so let's break it all down. Y'all get ready to screenshot, get ready to take your notes, get ready to ask your questions over in the Q&A part, okay? And thank you for sharing your goals with me, by the way. I really love seeing that. And, feel free to keep sharing those. And then, of course, drop your questions in Q&A. Cool? All right. So tip number 1, to stand out as a podcaster, you have to establish your angle. So most people think that you need to keep your podcast super broad so you don't put yourself in a box, right? Or most people also think that it's cool to start this general conversation podcast with the homies and make their podcast title vague or play on words. How many of us want to do that? We see it every day now on Instagram, right? It seems like everybody and their friends has a podcast and you make some clips and it's going viral. All right, let's dispel that real quick. Speaking of Instagram, most people also think you need an in-person video podcast to stand out. You guys, 9 million downloads later, I have not left my house to record a podcast episode. Every episode of my podcast has been recorded in my house, all right? And it hasn't stopped me from making money, making deals, having amazing guests. So all of these that I just shared with you are myths. And by the way, shout out to Love is Blind. If anybody knows who this is, had to do it. This was a good podcast episode, by the way. So here's what happens when you think these myths, okay? You make it hard for people to find your show. You make it hard for people to know what your show is even about, and then they're not going to know it's for them. And you also waste a lot of money before you start making any money from your show. I don't want you to do that. So here is what you should do instead to stand out as a podcaster. Number 1 is get clear on what your show is really about, or what you want your show to really be about. Why do you want to start this? What's missing? What do you want to talk about that no one else is talking about? Or if they're talking about it, what's missing from the conversation? Number 2, don't be afraid of the word niche, okay? Don't be afraid of it. Pick a niche, AKA your show's angle, your perspective, what people can expect to learn from you, what's different. Don't just say, I want to make a show about motherhood. What aspects of motherhood? What kind of mothers do you want to talk to? What about it? What stage of motherhood? Get specific. And then, of course, you have to make it easy for people to find you and know what your show is about. So that goes back to how we're titling the show. That goes back to how we're titling the episodes and the description, right? If people can't find you, they cannot listen. So it's hard for people sometimes to wrap their minds around this concept. They're like, oh, Nikayla, like, no, my show, we're going to touch on different topics. I see other podcasters doing that. I don't know what you're talking about. Why can't I do that? Well, let me tell you something about those other podcasters, okay? Even your favorite conversational podcasts are still known for their angle. They're still using an angle. So what they have, when you have a show, a conversation show that touches on different things, how they unify those things is with an overarching thread. Think about it as an overarching umbrella that unites the various topics that they may touch on. So, for example, if you listen to Getting Grown, they're touching on adulting as Black women, and that's the overarching thread that is going to unite the various topics. Another way they unite the topics, and again, another way they make their show have an angle, is they have a format to that show. Every episode follows that format with its specific segments that happen in every single episode. That is how you create that consistency and the expectation. So they consistently speak about certain subjects. For example, pop culture news is the first segment, business, entertainment, dating, and relationships. They are consistently touching on certain things within those segments. And as a result, their audience knows exactly what to expect when they tune in. So that is how you create an angle, even when you want to touch on a few different things. So let me share my own experience, because sometimes people think that I'm picking on them, or I haven't experienced this myself. I know that it works because I've experienced it myself. I too started out with a broad play on words title that I thought was cute. Okay, my blog was called Kayla K Speaks. It was a play on my name, Nikayla. Nobody knew what it meant. When the words were all together, people often misspelled it. They called it Kayla Speaks. They didn't even see the K. It was a mess. And the worst part of it is that it didn't stand for anything. Like, you don't know what to expect when you see something called Kayla K Speaks. What does that even mean, right? So I was writing about everything. I was throwing stuff against the wall. And it's important that you go through this because it leads you eventually to clarity. But just know that when you're at this stage, you still need to be seeking out clarity. You cannot stay at this stage and expect to have success in your podcast. So after I started to identify what I really wanted to talk about, which were side hustling women who scale from side hustles to full-time entrepreneurs, that's when the name Side Hustle Pro was birthed. All right. And because of the name, that immediately gives you an inkling. You might not know the exact topic that I'm talking about, but the side hustle will catch the people who are interested in side hustles. So that is how you get more specific and you share your angle. This is something that a lot of other podcast moguls go through as well. So this is Erica M. McAfee. She is a student inside of Podcast Moguls. She actually was part of the first class of Podcast Moguls, and she has a podcast about pregnancy and infancy loss. And when she initially started her podcast, like many people, she said, well, I want to build my personal brand, so I need to name the show after me, right? Wrong. So when people are searching for shows about pregnancy, infancy loss, what are they searching for? Those words. They're not searching for her name. They don't even know what her name signifies. So through working with me in the program, she did a rebrand to Sisters in Loss. So the title itself gives the first clue, and then with her description, with her episode titles, that gives the rest of the puzzle. So that people now find her show when they do those searches. It comes up in Google SEO searches, all of the above, because of that strategic rebranding. You get me? So this is really, really important, you guys. You have to make it easy for people to find you. So that starts with your podcast name, it starts with your podcast description, and it starts with your episode titles. If people are searching for pregnancy loss, that should come up, okay? In your description, your title, and your the title of the show. So let's recap that really quick. that was just tip number one. We got 2 more tips to go. So I'm going to recap this real quick. All right. To stand out as a podcaster, you have to establish your angle. So, so those of us just joining, let me recap the tip we just went through. So number one is you need to get clear on what your show is about. Why do you want to start it? What's the impact you're hoping to have? What do you want to talk about that's not being talked about? Then you need to pick a niche, AKA your angle. What is the perspective that you would like to share? And again, I'll share the example. You can think about it as if you want to talk about motherhood, you have to get more granular than that. What aspects of motherhood? If you want to talk about dating, you have to get more granular than that. What aspects of dating? What kind of couples do you want to talk about? What kind of relationships? You know, all of these things are way too broad for you to not identify what your angle is going to be in your show. And then you have to make it easy for people to find you and know what your show is about. So if your show is about dating, your show is about motherhood, your show is about business, your show is about side hustling, there's no reason why those words should not be in either your show title or your episode title or your descriptions or all of the above if you truly, truly want to stand out and grow quickly. All right, so now let's get into tip number 2. Ooh, let me take a sip of water, you guys, and let me head over to the chat real quick. By the way, guys, put your questions in Q&A. I know I have the chat up, but put your questions in Q&A so that when it's time for Q&A, I can just go through them, boom, 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 all right? So that will be easier for me. So, okay, and I'll be getting to all of them in Q&A, all right? So let's get into tip number 2. Tip number 2 is to stand out as a podcaster. Here's a quick and easy method for you to follow to grow your show fast. I swear by this method. I still use it. The other day, I launched my Nikayla TV Instagram, quickly grew it using this method, okay? So most people think that you need a lot of followers on Instagram to promote anything, and that's not true, and that's not what I'm telling you to do. Most people also even think that, your Instagram needs to be this perfectly color coordinated with filter photos and the perfect sequence thing. That's not true either. But here's what happens when you think that, though. You don't even try to create content, right? You get stuck in your head, you overthink it, something only gets 2 likes and you get discouraged. So then you miss out on opportunities to share with your audience or make money. And then your audience and your opportunities remain stagnant if you keep up this cycle. And I don't want you guys to do that. So let's talk about what you actually need to do. You should just focus on getting in front of the right followers. And this is why the number itself doesn't matter, but speaking to a tribe of people with a common thread between them who have a common goal in relation to your podcast, that right there is the goal. That is the sweet spot. So what do I mean by the right followers? I mean the people who will be interested in your podcast. Those are the people that will click the link in your bio, grow your podcast downloads. So let me do a quick Podcast Moguls case study. So this is how to build your audience by targeting the right followers on Instagram. So here's Ashley. She's a Podcast Moguls alum. She is the host of the Stacks in the City podcast. And Ashley used what I teach in Podcast Moguls, the Side Hustle Pro OMG formula. And she used this to gain her first 1,000 downloads. You can, again, get ready to screenshot, use this yourself to grow your show. So essentially, the O, the M, and the G each stand for a step in OMG. So the O is for step number 1, which is to obsessively audit. What does that mean? That means you should have a person in mind. You should be so clear about this person. The last time I did this, this webinar, someone emailed me after and said, I want to target African women, and I did what you said, and I was just not getting good results. And I said to her, now you and me both know that that is too broad. Africa is a whole continent, okay? What kind of African women do you want to target? Who? You have to come up with a persona. Who is she? What country does she live in? What age is she? Where does she work? What are her current problems and challenges? And what is your show going to talk about that's going to help her? So once you have that, right? Once you have that together, then okay, I'm going to go over on Instagram and I'm going to look for where that person might be hanging out. So for Ashley, that was, things like looking at hashtags like Black women in finance, obsessively auditing what was doing well on that hashtag, also obsessively auditing things like what's doing well for other content creators in this space. And this is not to copy, okay? Let's be very clear about that. This is to do strategic competitor analysis to understand what content types are thriving in this particular moment. You know that these algorithms change every day. So you need to always be studying, okay, what's working? Do I need to put my format in gallery format and break down tips across 3 or 4 slides? Do I need to, do a couple of reels? What is really resonating with people right now? Is it infographics and so forth? So that is what an audit is. You're taking inventory, you're researching, you're taking notes of what's working and how you want to speak to this person, what's resonating with them. Step 2 of OMG is to make friends. So you're going to literally go out there and introduce yourself to people. Okay. I got close to the camera right there because we're going to meet each other. Okay. Especially in these new virtual times, these in-person events aren't happening in the same way. The way we meet people is not the same as it used to be. There is no difference between in-person networking and social media networking. Just don't be a weirdo and do it right, okay? So again, think about who your person is, and then okay, they're probably following XYZ account. Go for a mixture of smaller to medium-sized accounts, because larger accounts will have a lot of spam. Like if they have millions of followers, there'll be a lot of spam at that point. But smaller to medium accounts that that your person might follow, and start to introduce yourself with a follow. So because you've audited and now you're starting to create the kind of content that person will resonate with, they'll come over to your page and they'll say, oh, I like this content. Oh, I want to check out this podcast. So again, this is what I did in the beginning to grow each of my channels, any channel that I've ever grown on Instagram, and it continues to work to this day. So try this out and let me know. But I do want to tell you that the whole goal of this is to meet real people who appreciate you finding them and letting them know about your show. So this is what happened to me. This is a real screenshot from the Nakira show where she said, I'm listening in now. I don't know how you found me on IG, but thank God you did, and then she said that she was going to be spending her work days catching up on past podcasts. This is the goal of OMG. This is another actual screenshot from an actual message I received. This person said that my friend requests really brightened their day. They love my podcast. I actually binge listen to them and they are wonderful. Keep it up, girl. So connecting with your actual listeners, being able to have a conversation with your actual listeners, that's one of the beauties of these social media platforms, particularly ones where you can direct message and it doesn't come off as creepy. So that is the M in OMG, all right? And then the G in OMG is go over the data. This is a screenshot. This is not my actual or anyone's actual insights, but when you are on Instagram and you have an Instagram business account, which you should have for your podcast, you are able to look at the insights. And I suggest you look at them at least once a week, because it will show you things like who is really connecting to your account. How did it grow this week? What countries are they coming from? What times of day are they most active? How many, what content perform the best in terms of engagements and all of the above. And so then you're going to use that data to inform the strategy and the content you create the following week. So here's what happened as a result of Ashley following the OMG process. So Ashley went from having 758 followers on Instagram to 1,216. And you can see that she's continued to grow from that. And she did this in less than 8 weeks in Podcast Moguls, okay? So you might be wondering, well, how does that translate to her podcast? Her podcast, Stacks in the City, went from 300 to 1,400 monthly downloads in less than 8 weeks in being inside of the program. And, you might be saying, oh, these numbers that, they look small, but that's actually a 4X jump, you guys. Would you like that for your show? A 4X jump at any point in time? I would love a 4X jump for my downloads. So That is why getting in front of the right followers is so important, because as your followers grow, so do your downloads, so does your audience. So during this time of extreme growth, actually her podcast Stacks in the City landed in the top business charts on Apple Podcasts. You can see her number 179. This is 179 in business. And there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts now, you guys, especially in business. So for her to be in the top 200 is a huge accomplishment. You're competing with hundreds of thousands of other podcasters. So even if you decide to move beyond podcasting and you don't keep up with it, like in Ashley's example, she's actually used the Stacks in the City platform to expand her personal brand and income generating opportunities beyond podcasting. So now she hosts house hunters workshops and webinars on the whole process of real estate investing, because she's done this, and like she just turned 30. Like the other day or a couple of years ago. Like, she is young and has had multiple successful investment properties. So now that she has this audience who is tapped into her, has heard her voice, and has built that intimacy with her, she's able to then point them to other things that she's doing, and people are paying for her knowledge because they know and trust her knowledge from listening to her each and every week. So that's the power of podcasting. So even if you decide to move beyond it, just having this platform is a launching pad to so much more. So as your downloads grow, so do your opportunities. All right, check-in time. Now I can come over to the chat. I see some activity. Let me know, is this helpful for you? Give me a yes in the chat if it is. Portia, you says absolutely yes. Oh, awesome. Deborah, you said how do you actually make money from podcasting? That's actually the next thing we're going to get into. So, all right. Oh, great. I'm so glad you guys are finding this helpful. This is wonderful. All right, so let's go over to the recap, and then we'll go to tip 3, okay? So let's recap. To start building a big audience, you need to target the right followers. And you're going to do that with the OMG process. So you're going to obsessively audit, you're going to make new friends, and you're going to go over the data and use that to inform your strategy for the next week, okay? All right, tip number 3. Let's talk about money. To make money podcasting, okay? You have to identify your revenue streams and pick a path. So let's talk about some of the most popular revenue streams in podcasting. Now, these are not the only podcasting streams possible, but these are some of the most, like I said, popular, the most successful, the ones that you'll see most often. So how to actually make money from podcasting. Well, first of all, you have to get to know your listeners. Before you can do anything, sell anything, you got to know who you're talking to. So if you don't know who listens to your show, you can't create a product for them, right? You don't waste your time creating products and not knowing who you are selling to, because that's not going to end well. That's not going to be successful. If you don't know who listens to your show, you can't pitch sponsors either, because the sponsors, the brands, want to know who they're talking to before they give you money. They're not just going to give you money because you have pretty branding and you and your friend have great smiles and you ask them. They're not going to do that. So listen to your listeners, okay? And you can do this a number of ways: through surveys, through getting on the phone, through starting groups like Facebook groups or other communities with your listeners. Invite them to join, and also create freebies so that you get their emails so you can send those surveys out, so that you can start to talk to them and listen to them and find out, what are their challenges? What are their needs? What products do they talk about? What conferences do they attend? What services do they use? What products do they use? What questions do they have? All of that. And by the way, some of this also comes from that making friends on social media. Like, you'll start to get that feedback from people like, oh, I love this episode. I'm trying to, do X, Y, Z. Like that. That's an important reason for why we social media network as well. All right. So here are some of the options. Once you know who your listeners are, here are some of the options that you can use to monetize. Here are some of the revenue streams. So option 1, you can create a valuable product or service and talk about it on your show. And here I'm sharing my own webinar that I talk about on my show. And I also talk about the Podcast Moguls program itself. So this is a coaching program. So that would be a service-based business that I created about a year and a half into podcasting, when I realized through that relationship building with my listeners on social media, when I realized just how much people wanted to pick my brain and learn from me and replicate my steps in podcasting. So that's one thing you can do. You can be your own advertiser. You can be your own sponsor. And, in between on your commercial breaks, advertise your own service or product. Option 2 is to develop products that your listeners love and need. So this is an example from the podcast The Read. They have one of the most beloved merch lines that I have seen from a podcaster. And, people not only love their logo, but also some of their signature sayings like break up with him and words mean things. And so, they're able to do that. And then as you grow and maybe even have live shows, you can have the merch for sale at your live shows, and so forth. So there's a lot of options with developing products. But again, you have to really know what your listeners are going to love and need. Otherwise, you'll be sitting on inventory, and inventory costs money. Option 3, you can create a paid subscription. So this has become more popular these days, and there are actually many different ways you can do this. You can do this on Apple or Spotify itself. You can do this on something like a Patreon, where you create membership levels and provide your listeners with bonuses and extras that they get if they subscribe that, regular listeners don't get. You can provide ad-free episodes, but most people will provide that and more, because most people will just fast forward through ads. They're not just going to pay for not having ads. So this is an example from the Fred Zone podcast. You can always go onto Patreon, search for other podcasts, and you can see other ideas for what you could provide for your audience. But another key thing with this, again, it goes back to the main thing I said, the first thing I said, which is you have to know your listener. So don't just create these tiers, AKA membership levels, with what you think people would want. Make sure you know what they actually want, what actually matters to them, before you put those out there. Otherwise, people won't pay. And then option 2 is to pitch brands. Option 4. Talk about option 4 is to pitch brands that your listeners will love and need. So sponsorships is one of my favorite ways to monetize. It's the second way that I started monetizing. You saw my t-shirt. So that was the first thing I tried, was merch. And then the second thing I tried was pitching brands. So again, it goes back to listeners loving and needing. So I have a podcast about side hustles. And so I made sure that I connected with brands that can help side hustlers. So side hustlers and freelancers, what are they trying to do? Things like learn new skills, things like do their own invoices and make it easy for them to do their own bookkeeping come tax time, and also put up their own websites. So these were some of the first sponsors that I ever worked with as a result. And these sponsors were great partners, because I was putting them in front of their exact target market. And also I was providing a resource that my audience actually wants. So it was a win-win. So when you know what your audience actually needs, then you're able to go after the right sponsors, because you want that sponsor to see a return on investment, so they keep coming back. Again, guys, put any questions in the Q&A tab, so that when it's time for Q&A, we just go through all of them. All right. So we talked about the monetization options. Now let's talk about how to set yourself up to make money. So making money doesn't just come from picking the revenue stream. It comes from actually understanding the steps that lead up to that and doing those steps. So of course, you're going to launch your show. Like I said, it's about taking action, not perfection. So don't think, oh, I'll just wait till I have everything perfect to launch. No, launch your show. Let's work on it together. I'll be your coach. Okay. So you're going to grow your show using OMG and the additional marketing methods that I teach inside of Podcast Moguls. And then you are going to decide on your revenue path that you want to pursue. And you're going to try one at a time. I do not suggest doing all of these at once. I do not suggest trying all of these at once, okay? So you're going to decide, okay, do I want to explore a service, a product, a paid subscription, or sponsors to start out? And if you're creating a service, start small. Test to make sure that it's something your listeners really need. So Podcast Moguls is not the first program or course I ever created. I started with smaller, like I did a 1-week challenge and charged a nominal fee for it about social media marketing. I did smaller ebooks and things like that that were paid to really start testing out, okay, what are the services I can provide with the knowledge and skills that I've gained in my career? And that comes from testing and trying. It doesn't just happen by sitting in your house and creating this long course, and then next thing you know, nobody even wants that, okay? If you're creating a product, start with 1 to 2 products at a time. Again, learn from my mistakes. So I actually made the mistake of creating too many products because I got excited and I was like, oh, and I want to create this and I like this, I get inspired by seeing merch on other podcasters' websites, when in reality, it's really hard to sell even one product. So get good at selling one product first. If it's t-shirts, so be it. If it's a journal, so be it. Sell that journal till you're blue in the face, but don't try to sell a journal, a mug, pens, t-shirt, sweatsuit all at once. It's not going to work. And again, inventory costs money. You have to pay for all of that. Oh man, I got to go back. Okay. If creating a paid subscription now, be sure to research the market to decide what to include and what fellow podcasters charge for subscription tiers. So I know I showed you an example, but go and make sure you're researching different shows, smaller shows, bigger shows, because there are things that bigger shows with a more obsessive, loyal audience can charge and do that a smaller show can't. So really understand where you should come in on the pricing model, and don't just like say, oh, they're charging that, so I want to charge that too. Really understand what the market is commanding and what's realistic for your show. And then finally, if you're pitching sponsors, develop a media kit, okay? And I provide examples of this inside of Podcast Mogul. So you're going to develop a media kit. You're going to start cold pitching, aka emailing people at companies. You're going to have to research on LinkedIn and Google who's in what role. You're going to sometimes have to guess their email, or you can use platforms that will provide their email. You can even send messages on LinkedIn and ask for their email. And I provide you some actual language to do that. And then I also share a pricing calculator inside of Podcast Moguls, because depending on how many downloads you have when you start pitching, you need to know what you should actually charge. And there's an actual calculator model for that, based on how many downloads you have on average per episode, what your cost per impression should be, and we move forward from there. So I know that that's a lot of information. Someone's already asking, what was option 1 again? So we go ahead and drop your questions in Q&A, but I'll go back really quickly. Let me see if it'll let me go back. Yes. So I'll go back really quickly. Again, option 1, you guys, was creating a valuable product or service and talking about it on your show. So being your own sponsor essentially is the option 1 of how to make money podcasting. And let me recap those for you. So option 2 is developing products that your listeners love and need. So products meaning merchandise, physical products. And then option 3 is creating a paid subscription. And option 4 is pitching brands that your listeners will love and need. And of course, we went over, if you want to take a screenshot, like how to set yourself up to make money. And this is how the process works. Nobody gets to skip over understanding who your listenership is. That is the key ingredient to making money. Again, you can't sell to people, you can't pitch to sponsors unless you know who is listening. All right, so let's rewind for a bit before we get into Q&A. I went through a lot of info. There's a lot to cover with podcasting, and this is why I had to create a whole course and program, because there's levels to it. There's a lot of information out there, but lucky for you, like I have gone through all of this. I've gone from indie podcaster to someone on a network. So 7 years in, like I know and can share my blueprint. So Tip number one for how to stand out as a podcaster is, first of all, you have to establish your angle. Tip two, to stand out as a podcaster, you can follow the quick and easy method to grow your show fast that I shared. It's called the OMG method. And tip number three, to make money podcasting, identify your revenue streams out of the ones I shared and pick a path. Pick which one you're going to go after first and test, test, test. So based on what I'm seeing in the chat and what we talked about in the beginning, I know right now that you guys are in a few different camps, right? Right now, you might feel overwhelmed. You want to launch and grow your podcast, but you're trying to just do everything at once. You're like, oh, I should, book a studio. I should do this. I should do that, right? Or and let me know which one which boat you're in. Put it in the chat. So, are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling stuck? Like your podcast is not growing fast enough or getting enough downloads that you know that just not having a roadmap, not having a blueprint is holding you back? Or right now you might just feel determined, right? You might feel like you know the value of having a powerful platform like a regular podcast and you're ready to do what it takes to grow. Those of you who listen to my show or follow me on Instagram, I'd say, I'm determined. I see what it's done for Nikayla. I'm ready to listen to her. But whatever she says, I'm going to do. So let me know. I'm heading over to the chat. Someone says stuck, Tamika, Tamika, stuck and determined. No blueprint. I feel like a determined idiot. No, you're not no idiot. All right, so I'm seeing stuck and determined. That's interesting. You know, when I ask that, I never expect people to combine them. So that's good to know. But I want you guys to know that you have options. All right. So option one is you can keep trying to DIY your podcast with tips gathered all over social media and YouTube. The only problem with that is you don't have those people's receipts. You don't know what they've done. They're just talking because people like to talk. Okay. People love to talk and talk and talk, but you don't know, what this person is doing in their business. Is their business able to are they able to do this full time and pay for their life? Like, you don't actually know who any of these people are a lot of times when you see these videos and tips and reels and TikToks. So that's option one, though. You can follow that path. Or option two, you can decide to make podcasting a priority and use my proven roadmap that tells you exactly where to start and what steps to take. So you are all invited to join Podcast Moguls. Before you leave here tonight, I want you to know what Podcast Moguls is and how you can continue to get additional coaching from me. And please, as I go through this, make sure you're dropping your questions in Q&A. When it's Q&A time, I'm going to go to the Q&A tab, not to the chat, all right? So move those questions over to Q&A, cool? All right, thank you so much. So you are invited to join me inside of Podcast Moguls. Podcast Moguls is an accelerator program that teaches my proven and effective marketing strategies to podcasters who want to have a hit podcast, grow a larger following, and make money from their show, okay? So Podcast Moguls is for you if you want to get access to my inner circle of podcast business advice. You know how you have people in industries and you're like, oh, I wish I could pick their brain. I wish I knew more about what, I wish I could have a relationship with them. That's one of the biggest benefits of joining Podcast Moguls, because now you're in relation and you're able to ask me a question inside of our community via email. And it's I have people who joined the program in 2018 who still come back to me like, oh, I'm about to, go on this show. What should I do? What should I ask them? Or this brand approached me. I have some questions. Can I jump on the phone with you? And I always make myself available because I truly, truly value the people who dedicate and join the program. So Podcast Moguls is for you if you want to get access to that inner circle of podcast business advice. It's also for you if you want a top podcast. And if you want to get speaking engagements from your podcast, grow your personal brand from your podcast, make money from your podcast. Students inside of Podcast Moguls have done all three of these things and continue to do these things. So let me break down what Podcast Moguls is. So it's a 3-tier program. So you have it's a course itself on demand. As soon as you join, you have access to the video lessons, tutorials, templates, swipe files, and guides. And these are the actual modules. So I'll go through them quickly. When you come in, you'll see from module 0 all the way to module 8, we go from the fundamentals. So everything from equipment. So I saw someone mention they bought a mic and that was it. So I'll go through what to do with that equipment. Then we'll go through that topic and finding that perfect listener. We'll go through positioning your podcast and launching or relaunching if you already have one, marketing your show, growing your Instagram reach, growing your email list, using Facebook and Instagram advertising to boost and amplify your content. And then we'll get into monetization. So positioning your podcast for sponsorship and creating your winning pitches. You get my actual pitches, you guys. You get the exact emails, the exact media kits that I sent out that landed me thousands of dollars in contracts and continue to land me thousands of dollars in contracts. Part 2 of the program is the community. So we have a private community. This is a screenshot from something shared inside of the community. So we share questions, challenges, and wins. So this was a win from Felicia of the Trill MBA podcast. Her podcast is in the middle with that like purple fist. And she shared when she made it to number 53 in iTunes careers. Again, being in the top 200 of any category is a huge win because there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there. So that is how when you really start to focus and follow the steps, you can start to see that growth with your show. So part 3 is coaching. So I provide monthly video group coaching calls and we meet live, video chat. You receive personal guidance from me. We get into deep dives on topics. So things like editing. So in this particular class, we had my actual editor, Chris, come in and share and answer some more granular questions about editing that people had. This lesson is still up when you join today. This is a bonus. You can still get this editing conversation. It's in the editing module, okay? So those are the kind of things we get into in our live coaching call. And this is what one of the podcast moguls actually has to say about that. So this is Shirley. Her podcast is She's Got Drive. And she shared that, she only started implementing the podcast moguls marketing strategies like 3 months ago after she joined. And this is what she found. She had at that point about 25,000 downloads. And in the last 3 months, she's now at 46,000 downloads, okay? She says, my strategy absolutely works. So that's doubling your downloads. And again, when you double your downloads, first of all, you can charge more money to sponsors. And that's just increasing the visibility of your show, to land on top lists, to get opportunities, to speak places, to come on shows, to be featured in articles. So that the taking these steps to grow your show really, really helps build your personal brand and grow your opportunities. Then this is Fritz Charles of the Coin Gamma podcast. So Fritz, he's a guy who he just loved talking about cryptocurrency. He started a podcast out of just genuine enjoyment, with no expectations whatsoever. But he joined the program and said, hey, let me learn how to actually take this seriously. And wouldn't you know it, he started getting flown out to speak at conferences. Like he was flown out to speak internationally, because once you put yourself out there, you make yourself an expert. You allow people to see that, hey, here's a person who they're making some really good points. Like they're intelligent, stuff. Let's have her at the conference. Let's have him at the conference. And that's exactly what happened to Fritz. He was flown out to over 5 conferences, and it all came because of the podcast and because of how he learned to market himself and grow his show inside of Podcast Moguls. So to break it down even further, and by the way, we're getting into Q&A after this, so thank you guys so much for staying with me. So inside of Podcast Moguls, you are getting monthly live coaching sessions. Now, the value for that in and of itself is $4,000. Like if you were to pay me, which I don't do anymore, one-on-one for 4 sessions, that's $1,000 each session, right? But you're getting monthly live coaching sessions each and every month. And it's included inside of the fee. Inside of the fee, there's no additional cost for that. You're also getting annual community access. Now, I know people who charge upwards of $197 a month, which amounts to $23.64 a year for their groups. I know people who kick you out of courses after you've been in the course for a year. Like these people are limiting access, but you are getting annual access every year for no additional fee. You're also getting all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kits. So I know some of you may have seen that, people will sell like a one-off, here's how you pitch sponsors, here's how you get, here's how you do your media kit. And those things, as you've seen from what I paid myself, are typically like $1,000 to $2,000 value. I myself paid $1,197 value for just the sponsorship and pitching piece of podcasting itself. Then you'll also get my guest pitch templates. So how I pitch guests and my process there. And that's a $597 value by itself, but inside of the program, all included in the Podcast Moguls registration fee. Plus, bonus, as soon as you join, you have this available to you. You are getting Master the Gram, which is my dedicated course on building an engaged audience on Instagram. By itself is $297, but it's included in the cost of Podcast Moguls. Plus, you are also getting the Goal Getter Action Plan. So this is another course that I have, and it's a productivity blueprint for side hustlers. So this allows you to understand how to maximize your day and your week as a side hustlers and to get stuff done. And when you invest, you get this as a bonus already included inside of Podcast Moguls, no additional fee. So you're getting all of this. And in case you don't have your calculator, haven't added this all up, that's actually a total value of $8,553. But that is obviously not the cost of the program. The regular price for Podcast Moguls is $3,000, but right now we have a promotional price of $1,997. And there are two ways that you can join. So you have option one, which is to pay in full, and there are pay in full bonuses, which I'll share in a second. So you have option one, pay in full for $1,997, or option two, 4 monthly payments of $500. So you pay slightly more when you do the payment plan and you don't get the pay in full bonuses. You can head over right now to sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls to learn more about the program and to register for the program. And our next coaching call will be the third Wednesday in May. So you have some time to jump into the content before our next live coaching call. So the doors are now officially open for the next cohort of Podcast Moguls. Again, head over to sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls to join. I know some of you might be like, hey, Nicaila, I don't know, I have to consider this, I have to figure this out, I have to, do some calculations. And I totally understand that. I just want to share what I use when I'm trying to figure out whether to pay for something. I use the would it be worth it to you if equation. So I find it helpful. So try this. So I say, would it be worth it to join something if I got this result? Would it be worth it to you if Podcast Moguls helped you elevate your brand, land brand partnerships? So would getting approached with media opportunities or sponsorship opportunities be worth it to you? Then yes, that could pay for and that will pay for the cost of the program itself. That's what happened to Podcast Mogul student Tolu of the UI Narrative podcast. So Tolu, she actually posted this on her Instagram page, the UI Narrative page. She talks about how it started, just her with the microphone in her house, and then how it's going, the Google logo, because Google approached her and sponsored her podcast. And this was another one of those times when she reached out to me and said, hey, I was approached by Google. I have some questions about how to go about the conversation. I'm kind of nervous. I said, sure. And, it's like we have that mentorship relationship. Once you join Podcast Moguls, I'm able to say, hey, do X, Y, Z, make sure you say this, don't say that, and so forth. And it resulted in a successful contract, multi-episode contract for her show. So would it be worth it to you if you learn how to land these kind of brand deals? Also, would it be worth it to you if Podcast Moguls helped you be featured in magazines? So that would increase your downloads and increase your reach. Would that be worth it to you? If so, then I definitely recommend joining the program. And by the way, I'm going to drop this link in. Oh, thank you, Joanna. Look at that. Okay, so back to our regular schedule programming, back to the slides. So would it be worth it to you if you could be featured in magazines? That would increase your downloads, increase your reach. Let me know if that would be worth it to you, because that's what happened to Shayla of the Black Girls Wine podcast. So Shayla was featured on the left here in Black Enterprise, and on the right in her hometown, Richmond Times-Dispatch newspaper. And the Black Girls Wine podcast has absolutely just skyrocketed. She now has memberships across the country and just is building an amazing, amazing platform. So would it be worth it to you if Podcast Moguls could do that for you? You already know that the only way to learn is through action. It's not through thinking about this or trying to figure it out on your own. Like, you have to take action. And the best way to take action is by learning from someone who's already taken those actions and knows how to successfully guide you. That would be me. So again, if you pay in full, I do want to reward you for that. So definitely, Christina says, if I sign up, don't let me down. Yes, I go ahead, ask your husband for that credit card. If he has any questions, he can email me. I've had lots of husbands email me before and grill me, and feel free, okay? I can answer his questions for him. So I have a couple pay in full bonus. I have a couple pay in full bonuses for you guys, all right? Number one, I want to grant you my pitch email, the actual email that landed me my first $4,000 in sponsorship. By paying in full, I'll go ahead and send that bonus to you. In addition, I'll send you the 5-day branding blitz. So another pay in full bonus is this overview of what I did when I was launching my podcast. The 5 days leading up to the podcast, I took these strategic steps that allowed me to land in the top charts on day one. And I want you to do the same. So I provided this 5-day branding blitz guide, tripping over my words now. Also, I will provide my pitch email to Apple that landed me in New and Noteworthy. So the New and Noteworthy section, you've all seen if you've opened up the Apple app at any point, Apple Podcast app at any point, that's when your podcast is highlighted. Usually it is reserved for bigger shows, AKA shows on networks. And at the time, I was not on a network. And through that email pitch, I was able to start building a relationship with the folks at Apple Podcasts and land that feature. So that is a pay in full bonus. And finally, I will share my pitch email that landed me my first international speaking engagement in Barbados. Do you guys know how much power you have? Like, just with an email, just with a really effective email, you can access so many opportunities, both for your podcast and for yourself. So I sent this pitch to speak at this conference, and it was accepted, and I was flown out, all expenses paid. So I got a free vacation to go speak about social media marketing in Barbados. How cool is that? So that's a pay in full bonus. If you pay in full, you will receive these things that I just shared with you. So again, that's the pitch email that landed me my first $4,000 in sponsorship, my 5-day branding blitz, my pitch email to Apple that landed me in New and Noteworthy, and my pitch email that landed me my first international speaking engagement in Barbados. All right. So before we get into Q&A, I want you to hear from podcast moguls themselves. So just hear from a few more people about the power of this program, because I could talk about it and you think I'm biased, but these are some of the screenshots of what people have put unsolicited inside of our community, our Facebook community. So Dr. Alicia Franklin of the Research Her podcast wrote that, I'm sharing my growth chart to show the power of this program. I started podcasting in November. I had no clue what in the world I was doing, nor how to market the episodes. I just thought the people were going to show up. I obsessed over the course and relaunched a podcast within a month of joining the program. And she had so much more vision. And she went from hundreds of downloads to thousands. And not only did she say that, but she took a screenshot from her host because she wanted to make sure that people saw for themselves, like thousands from 184 downloads 1 month all the way to 2,125 and to keep growing from there. Speaking of downloads, Mia Clark, who hosts the Black Wall Street podcast, first of all, when she joined the program, she had a whole different podcast completely. And through coaching about clarifying the topic, narrowing down, and truly just having a why of what you really want to talk about and why, what impact do you want to have in the world, she decided to start this Black Wall Street podcast, which was about the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. Within 4 months, she'd surpassed 100,000 downloads, and the BBC actually ended up reaching out to her to interview her and produce a 4-minute short video with her narrating their piece on the story of the Tulsa Race Massacre. So these are the kind of things that you put yourself in position, you line yourself up to receive when you take your show seriously. And when you enroll in Podcast Moguls, enroll in the college of podcasting, so you truly understand how to set yourself up for these opportunities. So the last one I'll end with is another screen grab. Okay. I included screen grabs because I want you guys to know that, I did not ask anyone to leave this review. Like, they themselves decided to do this. So this was Shanichia of the Blunt Blowing Mama podcast. She, excuse me, sneeze. She put in her Instagram story, like one of the last times that I had a webinar coming up. And she just wrote, Side Hustle Pro is an amazing podcast coach. As someone who is one of her Podcast Mogul students, I can truly say she helped me get Blunt Blowing Mama podcast off the ground, grow BBM's IG page. I only had 3K followers when I started her program. And through her techniques, I've grown organically to over 21,000 engaged followers. And she says that because of Podcast Moguls, I was able to find my tribe. That means knowing who your listeners are. And she even gave me helpful advice when I started the BBM clothing line. So again, another example of when, someone hits me up offline and says, hey, I'm getting ready to start this thing, or I'm getting ready to do this thing, and I have some questions. And I'm like, always, sure, let's talk. She says she really knows her stuff. And if you want to really build a successful podcast, then her Podcast Moguls program is worth the investment. Okay. Keywords, worth the investment. I know it's an investment. I too remember every single large investment that I made, but it's really small in the grand scheme of things of what you're trying to build and where you're trying to get to and the type of money that you're trying to make. So again, here are your options. Options 1, to join Podcast Moguls, head over to sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls. Thank you so much again, Joanna, for sharing that. And if anyone has any trouble with the link, I just clicked on it so you can see, this is the link to join. Put any questions in Q&A. We're about to jump into it. Oh, I do want to let you know that the price, that promotional price, remember regular price is $3,000. The promotional price of $19.97 does go away on Friday, April 28th at 12 p.m. Eastern time, my time, okay? EDT, remember too, that when you pay in full, you will receive pay in full bonuses. The link to join is sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls. Really quick review of everything included in the program: monthly live coaching sessions, annual community access, all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kit, guest pitch templates, master the gram, goal-getter action plan, okay? So thank you guys for staying until the end. Stick around for Q&A. Use code HustlePro to get the rest of this month and all of next month free on Libsyn.com when you join, not when you join, but when you start your podcast and need a host. And so now let's get into Q&A. All right. So I'm going to jump over to Q&A, and I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I can just pull the questions up. You know what, Joanna, I think I'm just going to go into Q&A from Zoom. So don't even worry about putting anything else in the spreadsheet. So sorry about that. So everybody just put your questions in Q&A tonight, and I'm going to go through them one by one. All right. And let me just make sure you know where to join Podcast Moguls again as we go. So I'll put my screen back up and share it with you. Okay. So let's go one by one. All righty. April asks, do we need a gimmick wearing hats, glasses to be remembered? Is that, I don't know if that was a joke, April, but no, you do not need any gimmicks in podcasting. Kiaro says, how strategic does your approach have to be today? I feel I overthink the process. That is real. A lot of people think being strategic is overthinking. So being strategic means make a plan, work the plan, like I always say. So first step is knowing what you want to do. The next step is researching and getting advice from people who have gone before you. So AKA, that's why I provide Podcast Moguls, so you can understand, okay, what are the steps to achieve what I want to achieve? If I want to start a podcast and eventually make money from that podcast, how do I get there? So it would be understanding that roadmap. And then it would be starting to implement those steps. Don't overthink the actual implementation though. Don't overthink getting started, because remember, you are going to get better as you go. So that is how you be strategic, by starting today. You know what you can do today, right? You can join Podcast Moguls, or you can even just take away the steps from tonight's webinar and implement one thing that you've learned tonight and keep going from there. But don't overthink. Once you know what the steps are, don't overthink doing the step. Don't think the step needs to be perfect. It's about doing it. Next question is, do you need to protect your name for each name change? I initially registered as an LLC and protected the brand. So when you're first starting a podcast, this is not something you need to worry about. Why? Because of exactly what you just said. Most people are going to change the name of their podcast. You saw it with myself. You saw it with Erica McAfee. You saw it with Nia, who joined the program and later did the Tulsa Black Wall Street podcast. So the first thing you need to focus on for the first 6 months is making sure you're going to stick with that topic, making sure you're going to stick with that name. At that point, you can evaluate if you want to then incorporate and trademark and do all those things. But I wouldn't suggest that any earlier than 6 months. However, what you should do is still look to see if the name is in use. So still go to the US Trade and Patent Office website and see if this name is in use, because I've also had that happen to students before they joined the program. They had a name for their show that was trademarked. And so they ended up having to rebrand, because eventually the trademarked people are going to come for you. If you have any additional questions, put it in the Q&A and I'll answer your follow-up question. Tamika L or Tamika says, how much time did you spend working on your podcast while you were also working your day job? So I was infamous for working on my show 1 hour a day. You guys, that's all I had to give. I am someone who likes my sleep. I do not believe in grind culture, staying up till 2, 3 a.m. and all that BS. So I had to get laser focused, meaning I had to decide on batching my days. I had to decide, okay, certain days of the week, I'm going to do certain things. 2 days of the week were for recording the show. Another day was for editing. Another day was for social media marketing. Another day was for pitching sponsors, and so forth and so forth. And sometimes I would go after work to a cafe and bang out my hour. Sometimes I would do it on my lunch break, leave NPR, go down the street. If anyone knows DC and where NPR is, I used to go down the street to Union Station, quickly post up at a cafe, get some work done, and then go back to work. So that's how I did it. And that's how much time I spent on my show when I was side hustling. April says, can you explain what the OMG stands for? Again, O is for obsessively audit, M is for make friends, G is for go over the data. Natasha Winston says, if I like my podcast name title, how can I still drive listeners to my podcast? I'm not understanding your question, Natasha. What does liking it have to do with driving listeners? Give me some more context there and explanation. Jill says, for making friends, you are following people who match your ideal listener, right? Correct. Do you follow them and then DM them? No. Comment on their posts, etc., or do you wait to see if they're interested and seek out your content? So I don't recommend DMing people as soon as they follow you, right? Because that comes off as creepy, skeevy, and like you are a robot or using an automated service, which nobody likes. Like nobody likes thinking they're being followed by a spam bot. So what you do is you do engage, right? You do, you like their posts when you see it in their feed. If you have a genuine comment, you comment. So you start to build a relationship that way, but only in a way that's organic, not just going out there and DMing them saying, hey, here's my new episode or anything like that. I have people sometimes just share their posts with me in DM or in live and with no caption. And I'm like, what do you want me to do with this? What do you want from me? So yes, engage naturally. Crystal Parker asks, at what point would you start pitching brands? No sooner than 6 months in, if you are following the steps to grow your show. Is it after you have so many episodes published or a certain amount of downloads? So I would start pitching brands 6 months in, because 6 months in of consistency shows your seriousness. So I would make sure that I'm releasing an episode every week or at minimum every 2 weeks for 6 months. And then also that allows you time to get feedback from your listeners, make tweaks, decide if that format and if, that show title and show content works for you. So you actually need to be more focused on all of that before you think about the brands, because again, the brands, they're not just going to give their money to someone who is unsure about what they're offering and who is listening to it. So make sure you're really secure in what you're bringing to the table and what your show is about. And you spend those 6 months just working and refining. Tootie says, will you send this recording to us? I missed the first 30 minutes. Yes, you will receive the replay to this. And shout out to the replay viewers. April says, how long should the name of the podcast be in order to capture attention? Seems hard to do if my service is information. All right, I don't understand the second sentence. Let me know if I missed something. So when I say that you should make your angle known, it doesn't mean you have to be literal in your podcast title. You can get creative and still have a short podcast title, but provide more information in the description and make sure the titles of each episode, it's clear what your show is about. Your title shouldn't be too long. I don't see why it should be any more than like 3 to 4, 5 words max. But there's no hard and fast rule. It really depends on what your topic is. And then you say, seems hard to do if my service is information. Again, what kind of information do you need? One thing I want to point out is, remember that your podcast is about the listener. So your podcast doesn't exist to be informational for your business or infomercial for your business. No one wants to listen and support someone's, one long ad for someone's business. So if you have a tax service business, don't create a tax service podcast with the name of your business. Create a topic-based podcast that could perhaps help people with their finances, perhaps demystify taxes or demystify that element of money that you want to talk about, but do not name it after your business, because this show is not about your business. This show is about helping people with whatever is challenging them in relation to the topic. All right, Tootie says, how do you get over the fear of starting? All right, you need to have a conversation with yourself in the mirror. All right, you need to unpack what are you afraid of? The most common fear I see is being afraid of what other people will think. And I want to let you know that people do not care about you as much as you think. They're not thinking about you, they're thinking about themselves. Nobody cares. People will really start to care when you start to blow up. And that's when they're like, oh, yeah, Tootie, oh my gosh, I always knew Tootie, I'm so proud of you. All of a sudden people are resharing your success post. So it's a really interesting dynamic that you will see. But yeah, that's how you get over the fear. You remember that the fears that are in your head, they're just all made up. Portia says, how do you know your listeners? Okay, we talked a little bit about that. But so what I do inside of Podcast Moguls is I provide you with some homework that you have to do. You have to actually get on the phone with people or send out a survey to people to start to understand your listeners, okay? So that's the first thing that you need to do. And then from there, talk to your listeners. In your email, you're going to create your email list. You're going to be sending out emails, and you will start to get replies. You will start to get feedback, and everything from your social media DMs and comments every time you post about the show, to your reviews on Apple Podcasts, to your email replies. So you will start to know your listeners. And the final thing you can do is start an actual Facebook community for your show. So each of these things take time. So you're not going to do these all at once, but those are just some ways you start to know your listeners. Elon says, can we join your mastermind even if we've just started a podcast? Yes, absolutely. You're in the right place still, because the good thing about you is when you're just starting, you will avoid a lot of the mistakes and course correction that a lot of people who join with a podcast end up having to do. And again, you saw that with the Sisters in Loss podcast, which initially was the Erica and McAfee podcast. You saw that with Nia, who came in with a whole different podcast name and a whole different podcast period, and then shifted and launched a whole new podcast. So you're in a good position because you will be able to avoid that. But even if you have already launched, you guys, do not be afraid of a pivot. Do not be afraid of having to start and change some things. I did it with Kayla K Speaks. I shifted it. I got a new URL. It's not as painful as it seems. Stacy says, I need to connect to see how to get out of the blocks. Yes, let's get you out of the blocks. And that's one of, again, the key reasons for joining Podcast Moguls is that connection. Like, I don't have the bandwidth anymore to answer random emails or random DMs, and you'll be surprised how many I get a week. But I'm very committed to my Podcast Mogul students. All right. Portia says, how do you get on Apple? So I walk you through that in the first fundamentals module. So, that's just a simple registration process. And once you have your show hosted on Libsyn, you get what's called an RSS feed, which is basically like your show's address. And then you give that to Apple. So that's how that process works. April says, what made you decide to move from blogging to podcasting? So I wanted to move from blogging because I just found that I was putting a lot of work into, at that point, I'd started doing interviews on my blog. And number one, it was really hard to edit people down because I felt everything they were saying was important. I didn't want to shorten the interview, but I knew in that format, people were not going to read all of that. And so I would post my blog post, hey, new interview with so-and-so, check it out. And people would just like it instantaneously. And I knew they did not read it and they had no plans to read it. And so I was like, you know what? It's worth trying out this format of podcasting because I didn't feel that the written form was doing justice to the guests. I wanted people to hear the richness of their voice, our laughs, their stories, and pay attention, not drift off, not skim, not just like it on social media, never click and read it. April says, side hustle terminology. Thank you for all the questions, April, by the way, and everyone, thank you. April says, side hustle terminology is a term side hustle seen as more than a hobby. So the term side hustle does mean different things to different people, which is ironically and coincidentally why I started my own side hustle podcast, because the kind of side hustles I was interested in, no one was talking about that. Everyone was talking about like hobbies or like, what's it called? Gig economy work. And I wanted to know the people who were working, corporate people who had this dream of starting a business, but wanted to do it on the side. So that's what it means to me. For me, it's a passion project that you hope to one day scale into a viable business. For you, it might mean something else. Deborah wants to know, how much money can a successful podcast make? It can make endless money. Deborah, there are people who have just signed $100 million contracts for their podcast on Spotify. There's a podcast called Call Your Girl. Is it the Call Your Girlfriend one? No, it's not Call Your Girlfriend. It's escaping me at the moment, and personally, that's what I'm aspiring to. I'm gonna keep growing and growing and growing until I land that $100 million contract, because I see the ceiling as endless. Sky is the limit with podcasting. So, but you have to grow your show. You have to put and implement the steps in to grow your show. And it's very difficult if you are trying to do it, by just kind of like guessing and things like that. Christina says, I'm okay at math, but I feel intimidated at the thought of trying to figure out calculations and the numbers I need to know to see growth. Do you help with that? Yeah, absolutely. It's not intimidating as because it's only like a few numbers, so it sounds that way. But yes, we can talk through that, and that's why our live coaching calls are there too, because you don't have to figure this out on your own. You can bring it every month and say, hey, this is what's challenging me. This is what's intimidating me this week. Christina, you also said, I'm looking to do audio only. What kind of equipment is best? So for audio only, all you really need is a mic and a laptop. And I provide options for lower cost, medium, and higher cost. I started out with I think it was an ATR or ATX 2100. Like that was like at the time under $50, maybe even under 30. I used a Blue Yeti for a long time. And I'm currently using a Shure, which is a super expensive mic, which is absolutely not necessary. I bought it for myself for my 5-year anniversary of the show. But you can start podcasting with almost any USB mic. Deborah says, what length of time is good for a successful podcast? So a successful podcast is determined by understanding your angle and aligning with the ideal listener for your show. That's it. Okay. It's not about length of time. It's not about the title of your show. It's not about video clips on social media. That is what matters. Okay. There's some bare bones podcasts out there that are super, super impactful and super successful. When I was inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame, to be honest, I hadn't heard of some of the shows, and I'm sure they hadn't heard of mine. I hadn't heard of some of my fellow inductees. I hadn't heard of their shows. There was a doctor there. She's a, older woman, still looks amazing and everything, but she was like she had a medicine or science-based show. Very niche, right? Had an angle and loyal listeners, tons of downloads, being inducted into the Hall of Fame, had been podcasting way before me. And that's what made her show successful. So I forget if what you even asked. I think you asked for length. Oh, length of time doesn't matter. So it's about what your audience wants. So there's shows where the audience is expecting it to be 10 to 15 minutes because that's what they promised. That's what the host promised, and that's what they tune in for. So shows like the New York Times, The Daily, or NPR Up First, that's what you've primed your audience to expect. But there's shows like Tim Ferriss, Joe Budden, The Read, who their audience expects those shows to be at least 2 hours. If they get anything less than that in an episode, the audience is upset. All right. So it really depends on your audience. And you're going to find that out doing the perfect listener exercise that I teach. Remember, I'm no longer looking at chat, you guys. So if you're saying anything in the chat, please go on over to Q&A, okay? All right. Christina wants to know, what's the best way to find the perfect photo to use on an audio-only podcast? Should it match the title? Oh, I think you're talking about promoting the episodes here, right? So I would love to know what topic you're thinking of doing, because that would help me as well. So when I was starting out, because I do an interview-based podcast, and it was audio only for the first 5 years of the show. And you can scroll back on Side Hustle Pro Instagram and see my promotional posts would always include a picture of the guest and the title of the show. And I've tested out different ways of doing the title to make it more eye-catching. And because of auditing what was working at the time, doing what was working at the time on social media, the kind of text that was working for people. So if you're doing something with interviews, definitely finding and requesting a really good photo of the guest with the title. And this is where your titles will be really critical and crucial. My recipe for titles is all about providing a story arc, letting people know what they can expect to hear about the guest journey in the episode. So it's usually how this person went from this to this, or how this happened to this person, okay? Because you're able to quickly get a sense of what the episode is about, and also the topic, and understand if you want to tune in with that kind of story arc. So it might look boring to some people when you look in the podcast list of titles, but it works because you are showing people the transformation they can expect to hear about when they tune in. Another thing you can do is create audiograms. I share with you how to use platforms like Headliner, which create like, the audio line waveform on a static photo. You can do gallery posts. You can break out the tips from that episode into multiple images and create a gallery post. So those are some of the engaging ways. I recommend everyone doing an audio only show for at least the first year of your podcast, if possible, because I find that and we don't have enough time to get into this, but we can get into this inside of the Podcast Moguls community. But a lot of people don't realize that they're wasting money when they're not yet making money, when they're focusing on video, because video is not the flex that you think it is. All right. How long is the Moguls class? So it's self-paced. So there are 8 modules. I recommend going through it 1 week at a time. And then when we do our live coaching call, it's 1 hour every 3rd Wednesday. Stacy says, is there any access to ask you questions directly in this membership? Yes, you ask me questions directly via our private community and on our live coaching calls. On our live coaching calls, I'm literally there to answer your questions. That's what I'm there for. Okay. And yes, there's a replay of this call. It will be sent out tomorrow. Oh, thank you, Joanna. Yes. S. Lewis, did you have any problems with your podcast name, given there's also a very popular podcast titled Side Hustle School? No problems whatsoever. This is a common misconception. People get scared by thinking that, oh, someone's already doing something. That show was not talking about the same angle of side hustling that I was. And they're certainly not centering Black women entrepreneurs who started as side hustlers. So no, that did not cause a problem for me at all. And I'm curious to know what kind of problems you thought it would cause, or if you think, that might happen for you if you have a similar topic, like if you search motherhood, for example. So the word side hustle, it's not trademarked. It's just like, well, let me not say it's not trademark, but it can be used inside of your inside of your phrase for your show. And it's no different than saying, the word dating and relationships, or saying the phrase motherhood, parenting. Think of it the same way. So no, one parenting podcast doesn't hurt the other. If anything, it helps it amplifies it. If people are looking for Side Hustle School, they're going to see Side Hustle Pro come up. My podcast title is Girl, Put Your Glasses On. This reminds me of like Rachel, I think her name's Rachel, like Girl Fix Your Face, something like that. She says, it stems from my current journey through healing, path to self-discovery, and throes of life, such as dating, navigating single for life versus loneliness. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'd love to know a little bit more. I think when you have something like that, there's some nuanced things you might want to think about. Again, you want to think about, what are people searching for? Are they searching for girl, put your glasses on, when they're wanting to talk about or hear about dating, navigating single life versus loneliness, for example? So this is what I would say is one of those tricky things where we are thinking that our title should be a play on words or slang or slogan that we think is fun. But when it gets down to the business side of podcasting, we need that search engine optimization to work in our favor. And little to no one is searching for girl. I can promise you that. So I would want to workshop with you to see how we can shift and rebrand that. Dr. Orobosa Owi says, should you have a website up before pitching? It would be helpful. Yes, you should at least have a landing page for your show before pitching, because you want to be able to link to that. And you'll see that in my pitch templates, I linked to my website. And by the way, my website is not the website you see today. If you want to see what my website looks like, you can go to KaylaKSpeaks.com. That's still up. So I was just using WordPress, and I was using a WordPress template. That was it. And I pitched with that exact template that you see on KaylaKSpeaks.com. So this doesn't have to be a fancy website, but it shows your professionalism to have it up. Daviuna says, where do we go to if we're checking if the name of our podcast is available? Number one, you'd go inside of the Apple Podcast app or Spotify, and you would search for that name. So to see what comes up, you can also search on Google, say, title, podcast to see if that exists or what similar exists. And then if you are thinking down the line, you'd like to trademark this name, then you go to the US Trademark and Patent Office website to see what's in use with those words. JGM says, would you suggest recording the entire season first and then releasing weekly recordings? I do recommend having episodes in the can before you launch, so you're not under pressure. And if something happens and you can't record that week, that doesn't impact your show's consistency. So I do recommend having some episodes batched. For seasonal shows, that's something that we talk about more inside of the group, because with seasonal shows, you have to be prepared to still supply your audience with either rewind episodes or maybe like snippets from past episodes, lessons learned, outtakes, something, so that there's not this huge gap, right, between seasons. Number one, let your audience know that this is the end of season and the next season is coming. Give them something to look forward to. So for seasonal shows, it's even more imperative that you guys have a plan for what to do in between seasons. A few more questions. Jill says, if your show is labor intensive to produce, storytelling, original poetry, and you want to produce in seasons to have time to create new content, what would you do? Oh, we just touched on this, Jill. What would you do in between seasons to keep listeners engaged? So just to reiterate, between seasons, I would have some snippets from the show. I would also do replays, aka reruns of shows, and I would think about ways to take content from the shows to remind the audience on social media of the tidbits, the lessons learned, reshare some of the original poetry and things like that in between seasons. So that means you have to have a content calendar, plan it out, and think through how long is the break going to be. And you don't have to do the exact same cadence during the break, but you can't just leave them with nothing. So that's something that you have to map out. Dee wants to know, are directories helpful to grow like FeedSpot Live? Putting your eggs, when it comes to growing, the more visibility your show can gain, the better. But there's no one thing that you can do to make your show grow. You have to do multiple things. You have to be on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You have to be on directories. You have to, be in groups so you can get to know other podcasters and thoughtfully exchange and think about show swaps and things like that. So there's a lot that goes into podcasting, but it's not as overwhelming as it seems, because again, we're not tackling all of these at the same time. Even when it comes to social media, I remind all moguls that you just need to set up real estate on each platform, but spend your time and your energy on the platform that your perfect listener is spending their time on the most. If they're on TikTok and Instagram, but you only have bandwidth for Instagram, like I do, I speak from experience, then you do that. And when you have more bandwidth, you scale to spend more time on those platforms. But for now, you just have your real estate. All right. And then you post your show promo each and every time you release an episode. But as for in-between content, it's not realistic to expect that you'll be able to give the same energy to all of these places. But you do need to at least have real estate established, set up your profile on those platforms. Deborah says, where can you check to see where you're ranked at the top podcast list? So if you go into the Apple Podcast app, and you scroll down, there is there's a browse icon. And from there, you can go and see top charts is what it's called. And you can go by category in the right-hand corner, and you will be able to see top rankings in each category. Deborah says, are you based out of Toronto? No, I'm actually based out of New York City. I was born in the Bronx, came back to New York last year. No, I was born in Jamaica, grew up in the Bronx, came back to New York last year after spending about, how many years was that? About off and on 9 years in the DMV, aka DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Stacy says, what time is the coaching call? Oh, the coaching call on the third Wednesday of each month is at 8 p.m. Eastern. That call is recorded. You can submit calls and you can submit questions in advance if you cannot make it. D. Kemper says, my podcast name is Tea Over Interiors. We discuss tea and how to incorporate tea culture in interior design. Oh, very interesting. I admittedly did not know that tea and interiors was a thing. So I would love to see more of I would love to see that. And I'm going to look that up to see what the episodes are about before I advise you further, because there are times where there may be a niche and that may work. You know, if there are people who are searching for tea and interiors, then you're on the money. If this is something that you created yourself because you like tea and you like interiors, then that's a different story. So I would love to learn more about that. Natasha says, is the workshop only available inside the Podcast Moguls program? I'm sorry, which workshop, Natasha? I've already forgotten. I'm going to send the replay of tonight's workshop to everyone who registered. So that's going to be sent to everyone who registers, not just the Podcast Moguls. Regina Sanders says, I've been podcasting for a while, but stopped because I felt overwhelmed and had a podcast manager that had me overbooked for interviews that did not align with my vision. Ooh, all right. And then you say, do you recommend having a podcast manager? So I don't recommend having a podcast manager at this stage in the game, because it sounds to me like you are paying this person and you may not be making money from your podcast yet. And I don't believe in having miscellaneous staff before you have the money to pay for them. I think that your podcast should become an asset, and then that asset should pay for any kind of staff or hiring that you need to do. So that's number one as a blanket statement. Number two is, I don't understand what a podcast manager is supposed to do for you. You your own interview schedule. You set up a Calendly, you set up a Acuity, you set up a guest outreach schedule that you reach out to guests, decide which day you want that to be, and 1 hour a day, you go ahead and schedule out those emails until you're making the money to outsource and hire, an administrative coordinator, assistant, whatever it may be. But this podcast manager, from what you described them doing, did not at all seem like an important hire. Christina says, at what point, and I don't have a podcast manager, I have a podcast producer, a virtual assistant. Shout out to Joanna. I have a social media and content manager, and then, of course, attorney and a brand partnerships manager. But I keep my team very, what's it called? Escaping me, but slim, Christina, at what point do we consider getting a PR and assistant? When you're making money. I don't want to waste a dime on payroll unless it makes sense. Yes, we don't waste a dime on payroll. You literally have to treat it like your first priority. Grow your show, spend the 6 months being consistent, making quality content, getting to know your audience, and making sure you're going to stick with this. Then you start to focus on monetization. So you start getting your media kit together, you start pitching, you start tweaking what's working well with the pitches, what's not working well. And then, establishing business account, trademarking if you want to, all of those good stuff. That's the next phase. And then when you actually are making money, you can start to hire and you first hire for things that you need help with. And then the last things that you hire for are things that you do well, but honestly, someone else can also do well. Natasha says, yes, LOL, it's not just loneliness, that's one of the topics, but really geared towards Black women in their 30s who are single and living life, but experience other things such as situationships, getting in tune with spiritual side versus traditional. There are all the things I have experienced and currently going through and want to engage beyond the sister circle. Wait, what about sister circle? Well, I can tell you sister circle is trademarked. Sister circle is they have like a big, what is that, convention or conference? And actually there's another podcast mogul who's working through that because her show is also called Sister Circle. So again, you guys make sure you're Googling and seeing what else is using that. And what I'm hearing from you, Natasha, is a lot of I focus going on. And when you create a show, which is why I focus on the listenership so much, is you have to think about who's listening to this and what do they need. Now, you may want to talk about all these things, but slow it down and first think through, okay, what is my perfect listener going through and what do they need me to talk about? And what's the overarching thread that's connecting all these things? Black women in their 30s are not necessarily all going through single living life, experiencing other things, situationships. I just want you to tighten it up some more. I want you to tighten it up some more. And the one way you could do that is to start to think through segments. Maybe you have a segment on, okay, a recent date you went on. Maybe you have a segment on just, self-care, and you could weave in whatever you're working through with the spiritual side versus the traditional, because that's a whole other thing. If you're talking about what I think you're talking about, like, are you talking about like African spiritual religions? Are you talking about tarot cards? There's so many things there that can be a podcast in and of itself. So I want to make sure that your show isn't too broad because you're going through a lot and you want to talk to someone about all these things. Think about what your audience needs. And remember, your show doesn't need to be everything for everyone. All right. Like, people know where to find their health podcast. They know where to find their spirituality podcast. They know where to find their business podcast. They don't need it all in one. And a matter of fact, they don't want it all in one. So before you try to jump into all those spheres, decide on the one you want to be, because they don't need all of them from you. They don't need dating and spiritual advice from you. Yes, replay and sign up, Natasha, because we got some talking to do. Okay. I want to coach you so bad. All right. And everybody else too, Christina, everyone else on the call. Okay. Regina, okay, says, this is when I first started. I let her go back in 2021. Good. Glad you let that manager go. And Natasha says, got it. Cool. So I look forward to seeing you guys register. If you have additional questions, hit me up at hi@sidehustlepro.co. Deborah says, you're awesome. Let's hook up in the grill for a red stripe. Yes, yes, yes. And S. Lewis says, in the beginning, how did you handle your editing and what package did you use in order to not spend money before the asset is generating income? Before I hired an editor, he actually cold pitched me and gave me a free episode for us to test it out. And we've been working together ever since. So I would edit myself in GarageBand. It was not fancy at all. When I started, I was using the Beyonce song, Sorry. I was using the like beginning intro beat. And I show you inside of Podcast Moguls exactly how, you drag in the files, you increase the volume, lower the volume as you transition between, let's say, your intro and the beginning of the episode. So this is all very doable, but it will take you more time. So I used to have to set aside a day just for my editing until I got my first podcast contract. And for me, editing was something I didn't enjoy. So for some people, that's social media, or it might be, guest outreach. Hire for your pain point first. So that's why I hired for editing first. Some people enjoy editing. They're like, no, I love this. My friend Raina of the Dreams and Drive podcast loves editing, right? So don't hire for that then. Hire for something that's causing you pain that you don't like doing. Thank you for welcoming me back to NYC, Jill. Thank you. I love being here. Hit me up at hi@sidehustlepro.co, you guys. That's my email, and that's .co, not .com. Hi@sidehustle. Where you got your reminder emails from? I know you saw my emails. I sent you a lot, right? So reply to any one of those emails with your comments. S. Lewis says, hi, old school GarageBand. Yes, indeed. GarageBand never fails. So with that, you guys, I am going to wrap up tonight's call. Thank you again so much for joining. That's the end of Q&A. I want to remind you that you still have time to grab the pay in full bonuses over at sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls. All right. So I'll be sending out the replay tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining. This was really good. I loved your energy, and I will be sure to remind you guys before the deadline is up to join. All right. And with that, you guys, well, let me stop recording first. Bye to the replay viewers.